This story is about an Italian Formula One team which is considered among the worst teams in history. But this is a story that must be told in the right way, because if we only watch the numbers and the results, we would not understand everything that was behind it. And we do not say just because we are Italians and therefore we tend to be softer with things that concern our country, but we do it because we want to understand how everything happened and how we got to this end. We will tell you the story of a man with a boundless passion for what he did. He believed in values and handshakes, and it probably was this naive nature that made him fall off a precipice without being able to get back up. This is the story of Forti Corse, the last private team to debut in Formula One. This is the Forgotten F1. I'm your host Andrea. I'm from Italy, where our channel, Formula 1 Dimenticata, is a popular YouTube channel about Formula 1. I will try to tell you the story about the small forgotten teams, drivers, races, with a particular focus on Italy in Formula 1, because Ferrari is not the only thing my beautiful country has given to this world. Subscribe to our channel and follow us on Spotify, Spreaker, YouTube, all the podcasting apps. First, I'm sorry if my English sometimes will be bad, I'll improve. Now, let's get started, because this story is very long and very detailed. Guido Forti, yes, I will tell the names with the Italian pronunciation, or at least the Italian names, because I cannot make the English pronunciation, it's bad for me. Guido Forti was a great racing enthusiast. He was born in 1940 in Castelnuovo Scrivia, near Alessandria. It's a small village in northern Italy with about 5,000-6,000 inhabitants. There's a river just on its left, the Scrivia River. It's a typical northern Italy countryside village. So Guido began to attend the Monza track around the 60s and became a driver in 1968, right in the Temple of Speed. He was not very good at it, even if he didn't want to admit it. I'll tell you a small story so you get the idea. On his debut in an uphill race, he overturned after 20 meters or so. But thanks to that experience, he met people who turned out to be fundamental in his life. One of these was Pino Repetto, known as the Motor Wizard of Alessandria, the main city around there. He'll have a great future as a constructor in minor formulas and rallies. Forti got a job in his workshop in Alessandria and started to gain experience. But above all, he met an engineer, Paolo Guerci. They soon became very close friends. The real turning point came in 1977 when Guerci and Forti founded Forti Corse, a racing team that would make its debut in the Italian Formula Ford. Their first driver was Fabi, and the chassis were supplied by Osella. Some names that we will meet down the road in Formula 1. The engine was prepared by Pino Repetto, who put it on a Super Ford in his workshop just few days before the debut of the Forti Corse team. The debut was absolutely crazy. Fabi drove his Forti to an unpredictable victory by dominating the race. Fabi wouldn't stop there. In fact, he won the championship on his debut here. The adventurous spirit of Guido Forti led him the following year across the ocean to compete in the South American Formula 3 Championship. He enrolled Oscar Larrauri as a driver, and in just 2 years the team led the Argentinian driver to victory in the Temporada. Given the remarkable results obtained so far, in 1980 the team decided to enroll in the Italian and European Formula 3 Championship. However, this was a bit of a tough challenge for them, and the early years would be pretty difficult. The workshop was reorganized. The team needed more space in order to let the technicians do their meticulous work. The cars were arriving at every track, already prepared in detail at the workshop. That means that the adjustments to be made on track were really minimal and they had more time to run on track. The reorganization of the team was successful. In 1983, the team switched to the Dallara chassis and the results improved well, while the team was temporarily managed by third parties. Then, in 1985, Guido Forti took the team back and won the Italian Formula 3 Championship with the Swissman Franco Forini, who took 6 wins and 4 pole positions. After a slightly low-profile year from 1987, Forti Corse won the Italian F3 Championship 3 times in a row with Enrico Bertaggia, Emanuele Naspetti and Gianni Morbidelli, who in the same year also won the European Championship. From 1997 onwards, the team also appeared in Formula 3000 with Dallara chassis, racing with Larini in 1987 and Bertaggia and Crocieri in 1988. Claudio Langes drove for them in 1989, but it was too early to be competitive also in this category. They needed a bit more of experience. So despite what you may think by looking just at its Formula 1 results, the real truth is that Forti was a team with a winning mentality, which delivered constantly great results, wisely led by its founder. However, in those years, there also were some low moments. 1988 Monza Lottery Grand Prix. This was a very particular race where each car was combined with a lottery ticket. It was a bit popular in Italy and it went on for a very high number of years. So if the car crashed, the ticket would not have been extracted. In the Formula 3 race, the 240 of Naspetti and Morbidelli were easily P1 and P2. There were no real team orders, even though Naspetti was first in the championship, but Guido Forti was a man who wanted to give his drivers equal opportunities. He trusted people he thought they deserved it. On that occasion, it backfired. The two drivers made contact and lost a race they were absolutely dominating. In 1990, time came to take a further step forward. The headquarters were moved to a larger place in Alessandria, and the team signed up for the F3000 Championship with Gianni Morbidelli. In the meantime, Forti ditched Dallara for the Lola chassis after Bertaggia destroyed his car at the Brands Hatch race in 1988. In his debut year, Morbidelli was 5th in the championship and won the Pergusa race in front of a couple of names like Damon Hill and Eddie Irvine. But Gianni Morbidelli was soon chosen as a Ferrari test driver in Formula 1 and became also the Minardi driver for that year. For the 1991 season, Forti Corse relied on Emanuele Naspetti and Fabrizio Giovanardi, but the start of the championship was way below the expectation with 0 points in the first 3 races. The problem was that the Lola chassis didn't perform well at all in that year, so Guido Forti convinced Reynard to supply him with new ones. The results came right along, as Naspetti put in a series of 4 consecutive wins, earning P3 in the championship. The following year, the team ran with Zampedri and Naspetti, but during the season, Naspetti earned the call of March in Formula 1, so he was replaced by Andrea Montermini. It was the right move as Montermini won the first 2 races with the team and came up P2 in the championship. In 1993, the team's drivers were the Monegasque Olivier Beretta and Pedro Paulo Diniz from Brazil, who will play a fundamental role in this story, but more on that later. However, at that time, Diniz lacked experience and the result was 0 points the whole season, while Beretta won the first race at the season at Donington, finishing 6th in the championship. 1994, Diniz was confirmed thanks to the support of his sponsors, while the Japanese driver Hideki Noda took the other seat. The results that year were not that great, with only 1 podium conquered by Noda, but at the same time, in the head of Guido Forti, a crazy idea was taking shape. He wanted to take the leap and create a Formula 1 team from scratch. Well, let's stop for a moment. That idea made more sense than you can think. Guido was a genuine and passionate person, but certainly he wasn't a fool. He won a lot in the minor categories and he would never have made such an important step without a big financial contribution behind. So in 1994, Pablo Gancha, who was talking to a lot of Brazilian sponsors, decided to take over 40% of the team's share, buying Paulo Guerci's quotes. Pedro Paulo Diniz's family was one of the richest in Brazil. His father, Abilio, was in fact the owner of one of the largest South American large-scale retail distribution groups. Pedro got his passion for motor racing from his father, and he managed to make his way in this world mainly thanks to his considerable personal wealth. In particular, his father's company made an agreement with the Brazilian branch of Parmalat, a huge Italian dairy and food corporation. Guido Forti had an idea together with Diniz's father, so Gancha convinced Parmalat to finance the team's entry in Formula 1 with a great plan. For every Parmalat product which was sold in one of Diniz's stores, 10 cents would be used as a sponsorship to young Pedro. Everyone was happy. Forti could fulfill his dream. Parmalat would gain international visibility, and it also could restore its balance sheets in South America. And yes, Diniz would make his Formula 1 debut. Everything seemed perfect, but unfortunately it wasn't. In those years, the new technical regulation provided that the teams had to design the cars themselves. Why? The FIA wanted to prevent amateur teams from making it too easily to the grid without having any adequate human and economic resources. Any reference to Andrea Moda Formula is purely casual. So the Forti team did a first test in Estoril at the end of 1994. They ran the F3000 chassis but with Formula 1 tires from Goodyear, and the car was pretty quick, running almost on F1 lap times. It was a promising start. The team had a budget of £7.5 million thanks to Gancha's money and Diniz's sponsors. Though Guido Forti disagreed, they decided to hire Sergio Rillan as designer for the new project instead of Enrique Scalabroni. The last car Rillan built was the 1992 GR02 for the late Fondmetal team. Time will tell that Guido was right. Rillan's design choices were very controversial. First of all, he worked from California, forcing the other designers of the team, Italians Giorgio Stirano and Giacomo Caliri, to fly back and forth from Italy to America to see him and work with him. Moreover, the car will prove to be practically the same as the GR02, which was designed 3 years before, with basically no major changes. And another problem was the gearbox, which was produced by Williams with electronics from Minardi. The problem was it had no gear trigger. Forti needed to solve the problem quickly, and the only solution they found was to install a lever in the cockpit. Unlike all other Formula 1 teams who were already running a semi-automatic gearbox on the steering wheel. If you look it up on the web, you can find that there are many articles claiming that Forti used an H gearbox, but we spoke with former technicians that worked for the team back in those days, and they all confirmed that that's not true. It was a sequential gearbox with a lever. For the engine, Ford had many interests in South American markets, so it was pretty easy to reach an agreement for the supply of the classic Cosworth V8. Not very powerful, but cheap, easy to install, and the same as the direct rivals. Alongside Pedro Paulo Diniz, there was an agreement with another Brazilian driver, Roberto Moreno. He was an experienced driver who had good skills in car development. Moreno was the perfect partner to support Diniz in his growth path. The car was revealed on January 31st, 1995 at the Principe di Savoia Hotel in Milan, while the FG01 shakedown took place a few days later on the Varano circuit. It was a dark and rainy day, the track was soaking wet, but the team could not back down. They had to try the car, so Diniz took it to the track, and after a lap on the main straight, due to aquaplaning, the car turned and touched the wall and the engine shut down. The crew pushed it back in the garage and thus concluded the shakedown because they had no spare parts, so they couldn't risk having great damages on the car. The test continued in Port Ricard, France at the end of February. Here, Diniz damaged the car in a spin on the first day, while the following day his starter motor broke and a piece ended up in the gearbox blocking it. At the end of the test, Pedro said, "I never drove an F1 car before. All I can say is that it is better than an F3000 car." Well, that's quite obvious, Pedro, but let's continue with our story. Unfortunately, however, the main problem that came out from the test session was another one. The car was terribly slow. In fact, the lap times were 4 seconds slower than Mansell's McLaren. The team assembled the second chassis just in time for the first Grand Prix of the season, which at that time was held in Brazil, Interlagos, the home Grand Prix of the two Forti drivers. A perfect scenario for a debut, not if you have a Forti Corse though. There is one good news, at least Lotus and Larus left, and that brought the total number of cars to 26, which meant that the Forti were sure to take part in every Grand Prix without risking non-qualification. However, this would turn out to be the only one positive side. The second car had arrived completely unassembled, forcing the mechanics to work overtime day and night to put it together for the first free practice session on Friday. Imagine, it's Wednesday night, the mechanics were assembling the car while Moreno was making the cast for his seat. The Brazilian driver fell asleep in the car all night while the crew was still working around him. They pulled off an authentic miracle, finishing 10 minutes into FP1. The body was mounted with a lot of tape to secure it, and the car was sent to the track. Everything worked fine. It was incredible. Everyone was extremely tired, but happy. There's one funny detail though, they all were in a lot of hurry to finish everything. However, the sponsor's writing became Parmalat instead of Parmalat, arousing some dissent in the company headquarters, but again, it was a miracle that the car ran in FP1. The Forti qualified P23 and P25 about 7 seconds from pole time. Alongside them, there were the two Syntex of Verstappen and Schiattarella, Jos Verstappen, of course, not Max. The race wasn't any better. Moreno retired for a mistake and Deniz finished P10, yeah, but 7 laps behind. There was another small problem in the wind tunnel. They studied a solution that provided air intakes behind the bellies for the engine so that it wasn't necessary to open a slot in the air scope, which reduced the pressure, losing some horsepower. But after 2 races, the FIA decided that this was no longer necessary. Therefore, all the other teams closed the air scope and recovered horsepower, while the Forti couldn't do it right away and found themselves with a less functional air intake. The following races were a disaster. In Argentina and Imola, the two Forti both crossed the finish line respectively 9 and 7 laps behind, not even being classified as they did not complete 90% of the race distance according to the regulations. The Forti cars were being lapped so many times that it seemed there were many more than just 2 on the track. This situation couldn't certainly go unnoticed, so Guido Forti decided to fire Sergio Rillan and entrust the development of the car entirely to Giorgio Stirano. Stirano already worked in Formula 1 designing the Osella car in the 80s. What was the main problem though? Surely the cars were very reliable, a sign that the work in the factory still was great despite the team only having a 30-40 people staff, because Guido Forti tried to maintain an absolutely familiar environment in the team, as it was in the minor categories, but this was Formula 1. The team gets to work. The FG01B, an updated version of the car, was brought to the track at Magny-Cours, France, with Deniz. They managed to lose 60 kilos on the weight, with substantial modification on the nose and side pods, and the result came right away, because the Forti, albeit always relegated to the last position, began to suffer much smaller gaps. At Silverstone, the two cars did not finish the race because the engine broke, while at Spa, Deniz and Moreno finished the race in the last 2 positions, but only 2 laps behind the winner. Compared to being 9 laps behind in the Argentinian Grand Prix, that's a big step forward. Finally, they introduced the semi-automatic gearbox, which was tested for few races in free practice and made the official race debut at the Portuguese Grand Prix in Estoril. The season went on quite well, with a good 9th place at home in Monza, but above all at the Nürburgring, a sensational event happened. In the early stages of the race, Deniz overtook the 2 McLarens of Hakkinen and Blundell. You may be thinking, oh my god, what the hell is happening? Nothing. Just the track was very wet, but the 2 McLarens were on the slicks and Deniz had the wet tires on, but still, he overtook 2 McLarens. That's pretty huge for the Forti. At this time of the season, there were some rumors Hideki Noda could be Forti's new driver. Remember him? He was a former Forti driver in F3000. Now he was supported by a Japanese clothing company, which was trying to reach various teams to bring their driver to Formula 1. In the end, this didn't happen because Guido Forti was a person of honor. For him, the agreements made were low, and he just couldn't do this to Moreno. Although the money from Noda's sponsor had been useful, he decided without even thinking about an alternative to confirm Moreno until the end of the season. The greatest opportunity for the Piedmontese team came at the last Grand Prix of the season in Adelaide, Australia. Qualifying got off to a good start with the 240 getting 1 second ahead of both the Pacifics. The race was a mess. A lot of drivers retired and there were big chances for points. Unfortunately, Roberto Moreno made a bad mistake, crashing in the pit lane and retiring. The Nitz, instead, was on a good race pace until, thanks to the retirements of other drivers, he found himself running P7. In front of him, in the last points position, there was Pedro Lamis Manardi, who suddenly made a mistake and spun. The Portuguese driver still managed to resume the race, always in front of the Brazilians Forti, and took a vital championship point for the Faenza team, which now is AlphaTauri. The Brazilian driver had to settle for P7, which in any case meant P11 in the constructor standings ahead of Pacific and Simtech. This, however, did not earn the team the revenues for the TV rights because they were due to the top 10 teams. Now, after a difficult year where the team struggled, things were finally starting to go the right way and Forti was ready to take on 1996 with big hopes. But at this point, things began to get worse. Turns out that pretty much all the agreements Forti had with Dinitz's family and agents were verbal agreements and almost nothing was written down. Dinitz's entourage had given its support to the team to make the driver be known in the paddock and earn him a seat in a stronger team later. So despite the initial agreements with the team for a 3-year project, the Brazilian agents went to Flavio Briatore's Ligier. Some say this happened because Bernie Ecclestone convinced his friend Briatore that the money brought by the Nitz family was a good investment. Another very important role was played by Daniele Morelli, who at the time and since 1994 was Forti's sporting director. He also left the team and became the Brazilian driver's new manager. The agreements with Forti, as we said, were tied to a simple handshake, to a verbal agreement. There were not many written things, so it was pretty easy for the Nitz and his agents to suddenly leave the team with no problem whatsoever. Dinitz's sponsors promised to continue and pay what was agreed, but Forti's wallet saw not very much money. Consequences were catastrophic. The team had just signed an agreement with Ford for a more powerful engine in 1996, the Ford ECA Zetec R V8, the same as the Sauber team in 1995. It was a very expensive engine and therefore the development of the new car wasn't financially hedged. An agreement was found with a paying driver, Frank Lagorce. For the other seat, the team tried to sign Giovanni Lavaggi, who, Johnny Washing Machine, it's him. In fact, he drove the Forti car at the Bologna Motor Show in December 1995 together with Andrea Montermini and Vittorio Zoboli. They were competing for an indoor trophy against Minardi with Giancarlo Fisichella, Luca Badoer and Pierluigi Martini. Guido Forti wanted Lavaggi because he knew the driving skills of the Sicilian driver from the F3 days. Also, Lavaggi brought some good sponsor with him. His partner Pablo Gancia, however, vetoed it, so Forti hired Andrea Montermini, also a former team driver from F3000 days. But, due to the few funds and the project delay, the new car wouldn't be ready before Imola. So for the first races, the team will race with the FG02, basically the same as the previous model, but with essentially only the addition of the headrest and the other modification necessary for the new engine. Cesare Fiorio was appointed as a team manager. He had a lot of experience working for Ferrari back in the Prost and Mansell days, and he was determined to help his friend Guido and his team, but his job wasn't going to be easy. But that wasn't enough. The money promised by Lagorce's sponsors vanished, so the driver was replaced by Luca Badoer on loan from Menardi. The team managed to get on the track at the first race in Australia with some arranged equipment. For example, both front and rear wings were taken from the previous season. In fact, if you search for the 1996 Australian Grand Prix photos, you could see the Parmalat stickers that had just been removed from the wings. There is also a funny story behind that race. As you know, we Italians like our food a lot, and I mean a lot. Guido Forti was no exception to this rule, and he and the team absolutely wanted to bring with them Italian pasta and sauces to cook in the paddock, but Australian customs are apparently very strict on this, so they found a creative solution. They hid pasta and sauces inside the car to make them go unnoticed at the custom controls, and they made it pure Italian genius. However, the problems were not over. In fact, the FIA decided to introduce the 100% rule. Those drivers who set a qualifying time over this threshold could not take part in the race. That was lethal for the Forti team in Melbourne. The closest was Badoer, who was 4 tenths lower. Furthermore, the new updated Ford engine was more powerful, but it didn't adapt well to the old chassis, and that brought major overheating problems. The bodywork almost caught fire when the car returned to the pits. The crew were desperately trying to widen the side pods with a hacksaw. This aroused the hilarity of some Williams mechanics who, as they were passing in front of the Forti garage, were making the hacksaw noise with their mouth to make fun of their Italian colleagues. Not much class in this. In Argentina, Montermini crossed the line P10 and last, 3 laps behind, while Badoer was thrown out by Deniz, who made him flip over and over in a frightening accident. Luckily for him, no major damage was made, but it was very frightening. After another double non-qualification at the Nürburgring, finally the new FGO3 debuted in Imola. Just for Luca Badoer, there was only one car available. Badoer would finish P10 and last, 4 laps behind in the race, while Montermini with the old car spec couldn't even qualify. The finances of the team, however, were very low. The money of the sponsors came with the dropper. Next race was the 1996 Monaco Grand Prix, a watershed race for the history of the Forti Corse. It didn't start very well. On Sunday, 10 minutes of practice were granted because it had just started raining before the race, and Montermini wrecked his car and couldn't take part in the Grand Prix. Luca Badoer, thanks to many retirements, was steadily in the top 10. Almost at the end of the race, however, a misunderstanding while Villeneuve was lapping him put an end to the race of both drivers. A real shame if we consider that only 3 cars finished that race. After the race, Guido Forti was contacted by Shannon Racing, which belonged to the Irish company Filmfirst, which controlled the so-called group. They introduced themselves as an industrial group eager to advertise in Formula 1 and offered Forti the opportunity to acquire 51% of the team shares and enter the company. Guido Forti, as we learned in this episode, was someone who trusted people, and he was also a person who delegated things he thought he was not prepared enough for. But above all, he had no other choice. His personal assets could no longer cover the expenses. He said, "Shannon aims to broaden their horizons in Formula 1, while our team needs a valid partner to bear the burdens of the highest formula. These assumptions will allow us to look to the future with greater confidence." And it wasn't really like that, no, but we'll talk about that in a minute. Following the agreement at the next race in Barcelona, the Forti showed up in an all-new white-green livery, which, however, did not bring much luck to the team. In fact, both cars did not qualify. In the end, we gotta say, Shannon Racing was a big giant scam. Guido wouldn't see nothing, not even a cent of what was agreed, and Forti found itself bankrupt, with Ford also ceasing to supply new engines. For the French GP, the team arranged with the materials they had available, but in the race, the 2 old engines mounted on the cars both broke. At Silverstone, the two cars never took to the track, while at Hockenheim, the team arrived with its trucks at the circuit but without the possibility of taking the cars to the track. The team declares bankruptcy. With another absurd thing that happened, Forti sued Shannon for scam, but due to lack of evidence, he lost the case, with Shannon being assigned 100% of the shares of the team, which however no longer existed. Guido Forti died in 2013. The story of the Forti Corse, the last private team to enter Formula 1, ends here. By now, times have changed. A well-organized team made up of capable and dream-driven people could no longer enter Formula 1 only on their own strength. With the failure of Forti, the era of dreams ends forever. Guido Forti was a charismatic and passionate man who loved his job and risked everything to pursue his dream, achieving remarkable results in the minor categories, but the Formula 1 challenge was lost also due to his too much honesty. He lost, yes, but with great honor. Thank you for listening. See you very soon on Forgotten Formula 1.